All right, I'm going to talk a lot about, in this video, about Christopher Dorner. Become kind of a big issue over the last week or so. The topic's still hot. Obviously, a lot of people still discussing it. When I did a search on YouTube, an updated search, videos that kind of lionize him are at the top of the ratings. However, when we look at the number of views, that's a little bit different. Looks like this guy's got 500,000 views when he's talking about this and about Dorner's death. And then it gets into the tens of thousands, 50,000s. Obviously, Alex Jones has had a lot of commentary to make. And there's also, like this thing out of RT and some of these other former LA cops are coming out and saying, hey, listen, a lot of what he said was true. Well, yeah, to a degree, but here's the other thing that's going on with this guy is that when he decided to start killing people, it was none of the people that had personally wronged him. I mean, I can understand to some degree somebody taking out revenge shootings. A lot of people can. Okay, there's another kind of a high-profile guy who's been in the tactical forums. Some love him, some hate him. Goes by the name of Gabriel Suarez. There's some videos, you can do some name searches on him. I'm not going to speak for Gabriel Suarez, but I would say look up, do a search on Gabriel Suarez and the 700 Club. And you're going to find out what happens with a lot of these police officers, high stress, workplace-related issues. We also have to realize that Dorner did come from an environment that has a very high suicide rate. And in some previous security work that I've done, I had an opportunity to work with some relatively well politically connected people, oddly enough, on the Democrat Party side. And when I had started to have, some kind of off-the-cuff discussions about gun control, the subject came up about the workplace shootings that were happening at that time in the late 90s with the postal workers. And I was working a little bit with a guy who had also worked as a kind of a troubleshooter for a union. And he would go in and do some of the post-incident investigations whenever they had these big incidents at the post offices. And his insights on that were pretty interesting. And they usually revolved around, of course, this is through his lens of being a union official, was that a lot of those workplace shootings were the result of stress caused by management. Was his opinion that management would stress somebody out. They would hope somebody would have a emotional breakdown, cry, and leave, and then most of the time that's what happened. 1 out of 100 of the people that were forced to have an emotional breakdown and leave would commit suicide. And then, 1 out of 100 of that, hypothetically, although they're nobody's really sure where the suicide, the homicide line gets crossed. But what we do know is that in law enforcement, we tend to see higher suicide and family homicide numbers than we do in other professions. It's been kind of a snarky remark that's made in some of the internet forums that a woman is less likely to be killed by her husband if she's married to a Hell's Angel than if she's married to a New York City police officer. Kind of a true statistic. And when you have those types of situations, a workplace rampage is eventually going to happen. And because of that, there's a lot of stuff on Google on managing conflict in a workplace, and there's a lot of people who consider themselves expert in criminal justice administration who want to feel that these things don't apply to them because they're already a legal organization. So what happens is a lot of times very confrontational methods of resolving conflict. In Dorner's situation, he he did not physically step in to stop a police brutality incident of a disabled person. What he did was he reported the incident after the fact, and of course he was called a liar for that. And I know people want to bring up race and gender issues, but here's the thing: they took a big strapping Navy guy who'd been in the Middle East and all that kind of stuff, and a guy had been around the block a little bit, and they put a woman in charge to be his training officer. That probably started out by not impressing him. I know that there's going to be some people who say that, oh, that's kind of the Mod Squad style. It probably started out by not impressing him, and it probably was the reason he didn't physically intervene. And maybe a little bit of a logic reset. Here's a woman committing an act of brutality, and I'm this great big 230-pound guy. If I commit an act of brutality against her, it's going to make me look bad, so I'm just going to report it. And that's kind of what happened. And then, of course, he was accused of lying. He was drummed out of the LAPD. And we have to remember that a lot of these incidents either took place at or in close proximity to the LAPD Rampart Division. Okay, you can look these guys up on Wikipedia, man. People, listen. The Rampart stuff, you got to read it for yourself. I'm not even going to say all this stuff, but these guys, you have card-carrying gangsters in that part of the LAPD. Race there is just plain over the top. I mean, the blacks are straight gang members. The whites are singing Hitler Youth songs. That's LAPD Rampart. Okay, that's some crazy shit. That's the environment this guy came out of. But I would caution anybody against lionizing him as a hero when, in fact, he did endanger the public with what he was doing. And, this guy was not processing through a hit list of people that wronged him. He only wanted those people to watch other people die. And that's where you get into textbook terrorism. Now, whether or not you want to argue the legitimacy of terrorist tactics against an abusive regime, which I think the LAPD, by international standards, you could probably call them an abusive regime. But whether or not terrorist tactics are justified against them, that's a whole different discussion, okay? But let's not mince words about that. That's what Dorner was doing. If you wanted to call it guerrilla warfare, I don't think so. I just don't think it qualified. If you want to look at somebody who very similar circumstances who committed to a guerrilla warfare model against a law enforcement agency, you got to look at Christopher Monfort. Christopher Monfort is was not considered to be in Dorner's league as a human being. He wasn't a highly achieved person. There's a lot here saying he was a loner, that he was obsessed by something. But there's a lot of things here that, they want to talk down to Monfort. And but if you look at a lot of his other stuff, he had a lot of the same aspirations as Dorner. It's just that Dorner had made it further. Monfort had been kind of screened out of law enforcement early on. I think he'd worked a lot of security jobs. And then he became very judgmental of the Seattle area police department over some very public brutality incidents. And he engaged in warfare against the Seattle area law enforcement people. But he wasn't necessarily going after their families. But he did go after them. And you can see that he's getting more or less a fair trial. He has received medical attention. They don't just beat him up and they haven't burned him alive or anything like that. And so for Alex Jones to talk about how something goes down with Dorner and a cabin being burned, you got to realize a lot of that was Dorner's own choice not to be taken alive. Monfort, of course, has had his speeches that he's given in court. He brings up a lot of points too, but there's going to be some differences in how somebody chooses to go out if they choose to engage in this type of activity. And I would really caution people, especially within the patriot movement within the United States, against taking sides on some of these issues until you have a lot of facts, and you have to really apply the same standards of conflict over what is going on here. I feel like, yeah, the guy had some points, but the thing is, as soon as he starts like killing third party family members, I gotta say the nut didn't fall far from the tree, but that's part of that whole crowd. Okay, you're talking about a whole crowd. That's not even a Seattle thing. In the Seattle crowd, it seems like if these guys got a problem with each other, they go at each other. Down in California, you got a lot of people, they have a problem with each other, they go after each other's families. It's kind of a dirty pool way they play. And, they played Dorner, Dorner played back. But guys, listen, I really got to caution against placing a hell of a lot of meaning into this because it's really just another workplace shooting. Okay, somebody had a problem with somebody. Somebody built up a resentment over time. They made their own decisions. They made their own decisions to be very confrontational about dealing with each other on these issues. And you know what? There's a lot of OSHA training on how to deal with social issues and all that. But you know what? You can't just give somebody a bunch of happy pills to make serious grievances go away if there was a human rights violation. And that's a problem they got with the LAPD. Okay, that's them. That's not the rest of society. I'm not a big fan of the police in every place, every circumstance. But you know what? You're talking LAPD. You're talking Rampart Division. You're talking about the nut didn't fall far from the tree. You're talking about the quality of people that are involved with all of that stuff. And you know what the right thing to do at this stage is what was done in San Francisco at about the turn of the century, which is disband the department. I mean, just disband the whole thing and start with a clean slate. That's what those people need to do. They won't. And the thing is, they still have problems that are going to last for the next 50 years because of the level of injustice in Southern California, just in general, with a level of injustice that they haven't been running the area right. And they don't really care about justice there. It's all about different groups and factions projecting their own power. So when we look at the LAPD, the Rampart Division, Christopher Dorner, I think we almost have to consider that a microcosm of what's happening there and not try to assign too much value to it in the rest of the country.